In Search of Poetic Understanding, a study of the interpretation, approach and methods of Pnina Salzman and Alfred Cortot. A few months before the passing of my beloved teacher, pianist Pnina Salzman, I had a chance to interview her for a seminar paper I wrote. In my paper, I tried to explore different approaches to the concept of interpretation, and naturally visited my own musical heritage, which I have been studying with Pnina in the tradition of her teacher, the great Alfred Cortot. The art of interpretation is probably one of the most elusive individual components of performance practice, one that, albeit the purpose of many searches, can rarely be systematically defined, noted, or studied. For Pnina, as well as Cortot, being an interpreter meant to devote oneself completely as a servant of the composer and of the music itself in order to discover, illuminate, recreate, and transmit the same intense emotions of despair, love, pleasure, ecstasy, hope, and pain that the composers breathed into the music they wrote, the meaning behind the notes. I studied with Pnina for almost 8 years, first as a private pupil while still in school, and later in both my Bachelor of Music and Master of Music, the last of which I completed only a few months after she passed away. And during this time, I have tried to make the most of every lesson, every concert, and every masterclass that she has given. It was my great privilege to reach out to these musical ideals of beauty and expression under Pnina's caring mentorship, and I tried to make the most of our special time together, as well as of our numerous conversations about music and life. I met Pnina when I was 15. 22 years have passed since we first met, and 14 years have gone by since she passed away. But as Pnina once told me about her lessons with Cortot, Pnina's teachings are also very much alive within me, constantly evolving and unraveling new meanings as I encounter different personal and musical life experiences. Today, in pursuing this research, I would like to dedicate it to Pnina and Cortot, my musical ancestors, to whom I owe the greatest debt. Pianist, conductor, researcher, and teacher Alfred Cortot was one of the most appreciated musicians of the golden age of the piano in the first half of the 20th century. Cortot studied at the Paris Conservatoire with pupils of Chopin and Marmontel, and went on to become one of the leading piano teachers of his time himself. As a musician, Cortot's artistry was unparalleled. His performances of the great Romantic piano music, as well as the French piano music, were uniquely expressive, delivered with his signature poetic tone. As a researcher, Cortot's many books on music, as well as his special study edition, provided rare perspectives and tools for performers. His insightful vision left its mark on generations of highly admired musicians in the past century. As many great musicians of his generation and generations before him, Cortot perceived music as a vehicle for the expression of superior meanings. In his book In Search of Chopin, Cortot quotes a few lines from the composer's draft for his Méthode des méthodes. Written towards the end of his life, Chopin attempted to capture his intimate thoughts about the profound meaning of music. The expression of thought by means of sound. The indefinite, imprecise speech of man is sound. The manifestation of our feeling by means of sound. The indefinite language of music. Art that manifests itself in sound is called music. The art of expressing thought by sound. The art of controlling sounds. Thought expressed by sounds. The interpretation of our perceptions by sound. It is not surprising that Cortot shared these same beliefs with Chopin, who was undoubtedly his most cherished composer. And Cortot's introduction to his studies in musical interpretation is filled with phrases such as awakening of sensation, the symbolic speech of sounds, the roots of music stretch downwards into our inmost secret hearts, music must live in us and with us, it ought to reflect us. Music must be the primary vehicle of our thoughts. Make your fingers translate your ideas. You will then become an interpreter, not merely a performer. Cortot's approach to music making was based on realizing its expressive intention. He did not play, he spoke on the piano, Salzman told me in our interview. He expressed all human emotions. In teaching as well as in playing, Cortot sought to pass this approach to the students. In classes, he dealt only with character and atmosphere, Salzman recalled. I mean, how can one play without knowing the nature of a piece? A clear understanding of the character was necessary in the lyrical parts as well as in the technical sections. If someone was to play a passage meaninglessly, Cortot would say c'est correct, and it was a terrible insult. It was forbidden to hear all of the notes and that they would only be notes. It had to have character, every passage.
Il me semble que le dernier morceau, Le poète parle, c'est là le titre que Schumann a lui-même ajouté à cette page immortelle, devrait être transposé sur un plan de rêverie plus intime, n'est-ce pas? Pas seulement la belle sonorité, la détente expressive de la phrase, mais un sentiment plus rêveur. La vérité est qu'il faut rêver ce dernier morceau, pas le jouer. Voulez-vous me permettre de prendre votre place? Et là, ne pas relier les deux phrases. Ce sont deux éléments différents de la même condition musicale. Et ici, comme une sorte d'interrogation. Et à nouveau une autre, tendrement, interroger l'avenir. D'ici, que ça s'inscrive simplement, non pas dans la musique, mais par un coup du génie, dans l'immortalité. Laisser s'évanouir les sonorités qui doivent disparaître, s'éteindre, et vous laisser simplement en présence d'un rêve qui se poursuit.
In order to unravel the music's character, Cortot applied research and analysis as tools through which interpreters could absorb the composer's expressive intentions. As a highly educated musician and one of the leading researchers of Romantic piano music in the 20th century, Cortot wrote several books and edited vast study editions, where he provided his views, commentary, and advice on the music of Chopin, Schumann, and Liszt. Cortot's writings offer unique insights into the interpretation of the great Romantic piano pieces, as well as a deeper understanding to his own interpretation approach. In his editions, Cortot's ideas are presented in such detail that in many cases, a single musical line is followed by a whole page of commentary, which includes historical background, musical analysis, poetic thoughts, narrative descriptions, phrasing suggestions, and unique exercises that, apart from their marvelous technical virtues, shed light on the music's structure, texture, development, and desired expression. Cortot's attentiveness towards understanding the musical intentions was also demonstrated in the legendary interpretation course he taught to talented young pianists who later became world famous, such as Dino Lipati, Samson Francois, Gina Bachauer, Vlado Perlmutter, Clara Haskell, and Magda Taliaferro. Each lesson was in fact a masterclass, for which students were required to prepare a piece not only by playing it, but also by researching its background, structure, and musical influences in order to gain a deeper understanding of its intended atmosphere, character, and interpretation. In the book Alfred Cortot's Studies in Musical Interpretation, Jean Thieffry, a pupil from the 1934 interpretation class, documented Cortot's accounts on the pieces that were played that year and described his guidelines for the students' research, a wide array which included composer's name, place and date of birth and death, his nationality, the title of the work, circumstances which governed its composition, plan, outstanding characteristics, character and meaning of the piece according to the performer, and finally, aesthetic and technical comments, directions for study and interpretation. Cortot's aim in this process was to stimulate and clarify the pupils' personal vision, asking them, "Give me something to read which is your own." One does not invent the history of music, one learns it in books, but at least let your reading be digested. Let me feel that you have assimilated its substance. In the lessons, Salzman said, Cortot would explain the background to the piece before anything else. When was it written? What happened to the composer? And what mood he was in? He linked the music to the life of the composer. According to Cortot, knowledge of the composer's life experiences provided insights into their inner emotional world and the intention or expression of their music, and therefore should become an inseparable part of constructing an interpretation. To interpret means to recreate within ourselves the work we are playing, and we should certainly make no attempt at interpretation unless we try to put ourselves back into the conditions under which the composition was produced. Comprehensive knowledge, in other words, is absolutely essential if we are to understand thoroughly what we are about and avoid the chances of error. Obviously, since the nationality, the period, the individual character of the composer, the extent of his culture, the events of his life, his environment, even his reading, influence him in his creations, a knowledge of all these things is indispensable to the interpreter who aspires to make his music live again. Cortot's desired analysis was far from being a dry and impersonal formulated practice. Although he was an in-depth music researcher, Cortot rejected any musical activity that had no emotional basis. Salzman expressed Cortot's dislike for the artificial and cold intellectual view of music in this anecdote. Cortot said that anyone who analyzes the harmony and structure of a piece without touching the character becomes a post-mortem surgeon, makes an analysis to something which is already dead. Cortot himself expressed his distaste for a dry, intellectual, and uninspired view and treatment of music. In his book In Search of Chopin, Cortot wrote a chapter titled Chopin the Pedagogue! Opening with an apology for the repellent association of these two words, which made him feel instinctive revulsion. With regards to his own request for analysis, Thieffry explained Cortot's guiding principle. Has the performer reached a poetic understanding of the work? That is what interests Cortot. That is why, attentive though he is to the accuracy of the pupil's answers, he detests cold dissections, which do not explain in the least degree the poetic significance of a work. To bring him what he calls a chemical analysis in which you have set out to enumerate subject A, bridge, subject B, development of the beginning of A, etc., is not the way to win his approval. If it pleases him to see the musician moving easily among musical architecture, distinguishing the parts and naming them exactly, he is still more pleased to see him defining the character of a theme by some richly colored epithet. Alongside the indication of a modulation or the figuring of a harmony, he likes to find some words showing the expressive tendency and demonstrating to his satisfaction that the player has tried to understand it. Cortot required his pupils not only to recognize the musical elements, but to reveal how they serve as building blocks of emotion and motivate the music's expression. As an alternative to common analysis, Cortot's method wished to inspire in them the taste for intimate relationship between feeling and form, between analytical work and emotion. Lastly, Cortot always preferred the integrity of the performer over an ungenuine or unconvincing playing that lacked sincere expression. And as much as he tried to be faithful to the composer and attempted to research each piece from both inside and out in order to realize its original spirit, Cortot was willing to compromise this authenticity if it hindered the performer's expressive integrity. In every work, the music must be the primary vehicle of our thoughts. If in the course of events we find external evidence confirming our feelings, we may rely upon this to some extent. But even if there exists an historical document establishing beyond question the emotional character of any given work, I do not hesitate to affirm that you should disregard it if it runs counter to your own personal feeling. Pnina Salzman was the first Israel-born pianist to achieve international fame and conquer concert stages throughout the world even before the establishment of the State of Israel. During a tour to Palestine, Cortot heard Salzman's playing and invited her to study with him at the École Normale, writing of her, "Cette enfant est la musique même." That child is the music itself. Though she was only a young girl, Salzman traveled to Paris and soon became Cortot's favorite pupil. She went on to perform worldwide in recitals, chamber music, and as a soloist alongside some of the greatest conductors of the era, to glowing reviews which praised her as one of the greatest pianists of her time. Nevertheless, Salzman chose to pass on tempting offers abroad as she wished to set her life back in her homeland. In Israel, she was regarded as the first lady of the piano, one of the country's most cherished cultural ambassadors, and a great piano professor who taught generations of young musicians, passing on the legacy of interpretation which was shaped by her studies with Cortot. Paris and Chopin and Cortot, all of it was for me one thing: magic. It was a special kind of life which was all poetry, Salzman shared in an interview. These special life circumstances were embedded in Salzman's character and beliefs and manifested in her music and teaching. Salzman started studying with Cortot after arriving at Paris from Palestine at the tender age of 8. Unlike other students, Salzman received private lessons with Cortot at his home, in addition to participating in his interpretation course. However, she did not speak French at first, and so, as she shared with me, she could only interpret the music, the tone, and the gestures of her professor. Isolated from her homeland, her language, and her peers, her entire world revolved around the music she loved. Another remarkable fact was that Cortot never worked with Salzman on technique. The spirit of the music was all he spoke of, even at her very young age. This was so much the case that Salzman later mentioned that it was only after she graduated from the École Normale and was invited to study with Magda Taliaferro at the Paris Conservatoire that she learned how to play the instrument itself. According to Salzman, Taliaferro said Cortot taught her how to fly before she knew how to walk. Nevertheless, Salzman's admiration for Cortot was apparent, and though many decades passed since Cortot's death in 1962, and even more since her studies with him in 1930s Paris, in Salzman's teaching and music, Cortot's spirit was alive. Similarly to Cortot, Salzman's perception of music always connected to its spirit and intention. Music did not speak to her in sounds alone. It was immediately swept and absorbed by live images, sensations, and emotions. Salzman felt the expressive meaning of the music with great clarity and intensity, and devotedly conveyed it in both her playing and teaching. Another key factor in Salzman's belief was that the spirit is stronger than the matter, and that revealing the expression of a passage or a phrase is the key to unlocking its optimal technical and physical execution, a natural manifestation of the music's spirit. Ultimately, Salzman and Cortot perceived loyalty to the composers as devotion to the spirit their music conveyed, and not necessarily to the precise execution of each notated sign. They were upset with performers who resorted to formulated executions without reaching deep into the music and themselves in search for its meaning, and always sought to understand the meaning of the expression beyond the musical aspects of the piece. The roots of music stretch downward into our inmost secret hearts. We hardly dare to probe those depths of passion, pleasure, ecstasy, and pain. Too often we are content, if not through carelessness, at least through a curious sort of shyness, to say, play louder, or softly, use this fingering, do not forget that accent. It is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential for what? Salzman also spoke of this in our interview. In Paris, if there was an instruction of piano, it could be deleted and rewritten forte. It was shameful to do everything that was written. The instructions of the composer were important, but there are 50 shades of piano. If something is marked piano, it does not mean that you have to play dolce. There is a piano that screams, a piano that is despaired, a piano that is calm, a quiet, dreamy piano. One needs to know how to read the text, what it means. While Salzman never insisted that her own pupils research or analyze, what she did demand and obviously guided her approach was that the text should never be viewed or executed plainly, without the drive of an inner intention, even in the production of a single tone. In lessons, whenever someone played for Salzman, there was an unusual feeling, as if you entered a different realm. Salzman listened in absolute concentration, tuning into the music. The atmosphere in the room was sacred. This, in and of itself, set a standard for us to apply ourselves to concentrate, focus, listen, and aim at the intentions of the music. After we played the entire piece, Salzman opened the score and took us through the markings she had made when we played. Her instructions usually delivered the bottom line, the character of the music and the means of execution through which we might express it, always linking the musical phrasing and execution signs to its meaning and character. Salzman's comments can be divided into several categories. Metaphors of character, emotion, or image, which enabled us to experience and identify with the music with greater clarity, sharpened our perception of phrasing, tone, touch, development, and form, and helped in our search for expressive tools. Tone and touch. Salzman's comments drew from tactile sensations such as heavy or light, warm, soft, smooth, sharp, and dry. Speech, speaking, singing, asking, begging, stating, whispering, and character or expression, gentle, generous, nurtured, etc. Phrasing and construction. An attentiveness for human speech and nature inspired Salzman to grasp musical form and development from subtleties of the phrase to the entire piece, speaking notes and musical phrases as words and sentences, and portraying whole sections, movements, and even pieces as an unfolding journey through which she carried the listeners. Arranging and choosing musical elements. According to Salzman, the execution of the musical material was a natural manifestation of the music's spirit. So the choice of musical elements, such as phrasing, touch, pedal, articulation, dynamics, and time, was clear upon realizing its expression. Technical choices such as fingering and movement were also affected by their expressive possibilities. Every musical or technical choice had to be driven by an expressive motivation. Maintaining good taste, balance, and style. Usually comments of don't, referring to the use of rubato, beautiful tone, clear pedal, etc. in cases of over-exaggerated or messy playing. And finally, technical markings, passages in need of refinement, fingering, and correction of mistakes. In her endeavors to study and interpret a piece, Salzman also believed in researching the music and its composer as part of her preparation, and committed to reach an absolute identification with both at the stage of the performance, as she wrote in her journals. In order to learn and understand every composer, every new piece, it is not enough to practice alone. One needs to read as well, to delve into the life story of every composer, to feel their atmosphere, what landscapes they lived in, what climate, what was the architecture around them, which authors lived in that era, to know them, who were the leaders of the people, what they loved, what they hated. In other words, one must truly get into their skin and put everything they went through into the performances of their music, and, most importantly, in keeping with the frame of the composer's style and era. That is why a performing artist needs the utmost concentration. One needs to forget oneself and one's environment and live only within the art. Without this ability to concentrate, no performance is complete.